In this video, we'll talk about stretch planes and stretch zones in Chief Architect, including using stretch planes to transform objects, using them for smart resizing, and setting up stretch zones. We'll be using some exaggerated examples to best illustrate what stretch planes are and how they work within Chief. They can be adjusted and can be very useful even for small transformations. Let's take this nightstand and try resizing it into a wardrobe. Click on the object, and then let's use the edit handles to make it wider and taller. However, since we don't have any stretch planes set up, the entire object stretches uniformly, which we don't want. Let's click undo a few times to roll back what we did. Then, with the object selected, click on Open Object on the Edit toolbar. Go to the Advanced Sizing panel on the left side. Here is where we can add stretch planes and stretch zones. A stretch plane tells Chief to allow your object to stretch only where the stretch plane intersects with it. It is restricting where your object is allowed to stretch when you resize the object. As we check on stretch planes, we can visually see these planes appear on the right, showing us where the area the object will stretch is. If we click the Select Stretch Plane Item button at the top of the preview window, we can click on the stretch planes and move them manually, allowing us to visually align the planes to be exactly where we want them, so we don't have to rely on typing out numbers. Stretch planes in the x-axis will intersect left to right and affect the width of the object. The y-axis deals with the forward and back depth, and the z-axis affects height. When you check these boxes on and enter values in them, Chief creates stretch planes. These values amount to the distance the stretch plane is away from the origin of the object. If I click on the Show Origin button above my preview, we'll get an axis display showing us where 0 is for the specific object. X goes to the right, so a positive X value means the stretch plane will move to the right. Since Y is going away from our object, we'll need to use a negative value to move the stretch planes toward the object. And Z is moving up, so a positive value will move the stretch plane up through the object. So if we set up our width and height stretch planes to be near the middle of the object, we can click OK and resize the nightstand and get the wardrobe look we were wanting, instead of it stretching uniformly like it did before. For another example, let's change a chair into a bench. If we select the chair and just widen it, we'll notice a lot of unwanted stretching on the arms and the legs of the chair. Undo, and once more we'll select the object and click Open Object. Then, Advanced Sizing. If we turn on the width stretch plane, it'll be right in the middle, which is where we want it for it to not affect the handles. Let's also place a stretch plane in the middle, going left to right on the y-axis, so the legs don't shrink if we decrease the depth of the bench. We can move it to the middle of the seat. Now, when resizing the object, it only resizes the areas of the bench where the stretch planes are intersecting. Now, let's go over stretch zones. For example, let's make an ottoman out of this long bench. Select the bench and click Copy Paste, and click to place the copy. If we resize the object as it is now, we'll see the legs shrinking too much to where they don't look like they could support any weight. Open the object specification and then go to Advanced Sizing. If we just add 2 stretch planes to either side of the middle separation and then resize the object, we'll get overlapping details on the object and make a mess. To avoid this, we'll use stretched zones instead. Check the box for uniform stretch zones between for the checkbox width planes 1-2. This creates a stretch zone between the two stretched planes. Now, instead of restricting the stretching of the object only to the plane, the entire zone in between the two planes will be resized, while the area outside will not. Click OK, and now we can shrink down the bench, and we won't have any issues with overlapping details, as the whole section is scaled down, while the legs are unaffected. We can also adjust the bounding box for an object to determine a buffer zone around an object for use with snaps. Select one of the chairs and click Open Object. Go to Advanced Sizing, and here we have 3 fields: Object Dimensions, 3D Geometry Dimensions, and Bounding Box Spacing. Object Dimensions set the bounding box of the object. 3D Geometry Dimensions are the size of the actual object we can see, and the bounding box spacing is the difference between the two. For example, let's first toggle on the Show Bounding Box button so we can see the changes we make. Then, we can increase the bounding box spacing for the left and right sides at 5 inches. After doing this, we'll see the 3D geometry dimensions remain the same, and the object dimensions width will increase by 10 inches. Click OK. And back in the floor plan view, we can see the bounding box for the object now expands 5 inches on both the left and right sides. If we have bumping pushing snaps on, and we try to push this up against another object or a wall, we can see that we now have an extra buffer zone that's being enforced. If we've added one of these buffer zones, but we want to bypass it temporarily, we can just turn off snaps. By holding Control on your keyboard, or pressing Command if you're on a Mac, you can temporarily turn off all snaps, allowing us to move the object closer to the wall, ignoring the buffer zone. But if we push any objects up to it while no longer holding Control or Command, it's still pushed back by the bounding box. This concludes our video going over stretch planes and zones and using them to resize objects.